welcome everyone. It's so wonderful to see how many of you have joined us today. Welcome to KanConf 3. My name is Veronica, and as always, it's my honor and privilege to be your host. I honestly can't believe it's already the third event of our series. Every time we complete one of those events, we get so much positive and so much constructive feedback, and we use it and immediately start planning for the next event so that we continuously make these better. So thank you so much for that. But there are some things that will not change. And we're going to continue bringing you highly experienced, well-known, and passionate speakers and provide you with this platform that we call KanConf to get as much value as our time together allows. We are driven by our mission to create a community of like-minded individuals just like yourselves and to share powerful knowledge and tools to help you improve, because we believe there is always a better way. Special thanks to PMI Chapter Bulgaria for supporting this event by providing PDUs to chapter members in attendance. You can claim your PDUs using the link that we will be posting in the chat. Okay, so today we will be focusing on the topics of leadership and responsibility, which are key ingredients in the success of any business. I believe you would argue with that. In particular, we will discuss what is the responsibility process, how does that tie into being a good leader, and why should we care? I feel it's very important to underline that this is not just some woo-woo concept that we sort of throw against the wall like spaghetti to watch what sticks. Every single company's employee, I kid you not, myself included, receives some type of training on the responsibility process within their first 2 weeks of joining, because our leadership team is obsessed, in a healthy way, I mean, with taking responsibility and owning the process. It's at the foundation of our work upon which we build our products and our services. And our own CEO, Dimitar Karaivanov, has said, and this is a quote, "The responsibility process shaped him both as a person and a business leader." So today's event means a lot to us, is what I'm trying to say. So thank you very much for being here. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce our two panelists. First up, we have our very own company's partner, Matthew Phillip, a capability cultivator, organizational fitness coach, and workplace activist with 20 years of global experience in helping organizations and large enterprises become continually fit for purpose. Matt has a passion for agile methods and practices such as Kanban, Scrum, and Lean. He stands behind the global thought leadership and agile transformations of some massive companies, most recently Pfizer, where he is a senior director, agile coaching, and Kaizen lead. He is especially passionate about building learning organizations and creating humanizing and engaging work environments. He also has a great informational blog, which I've been recently reading, so follow him on LinkedIn to find out more. Next, we have Christopher Avery, CEO and founder of The Responsibility Company. Driven by the nagging question of why are so many smart people unhappy at work? Christopher has dedicated over 25 years of applied research on responsibility taking and leadership. When he began studying it, the responsibility process was just a sort of a newly emerging behavioral science framework, but has now blossomed into the world's first proven how-to approach for understanding, teaching, and taking personal responsibility. Christopher has written on this extensively in his latest book, The Responsibility Process, and continues to teach it as the host of the Leadership Gift Program, where he applies his wealth of knowledge about personal responsibility and performance to support leaders like you in building highly reliable, agile, and sustainable teams. Needless to say, we at Kanbanese are big fans of this work. Okay, it's always so hard to keep these intros short because there's so much I could say about our panelists. Because they're so genuinely awesome, successful, and such knowledgeable people, but I will keep it short. Before I pass on the microphone to them, I have a very important request from you. Now, bear with me. In order to provide the absolute highest value to you, which is always our goal, we will be hosting today's Q&A portion of the webinar in the form of short mini mentoring sessions. For this reason, we ask that you use the hand raise button at the bottom of your screen and, drum roll, ask your questions out loud. I will unmute you when it's time for you to speak. This way, our panel can ask you further clarifying questions for context's sake so that the response is tailored to your needs. Now, before you panic and instantly think, heck no, I'm not speaking in front of hundreds of people. No, no, no. I want you to recognize the golden opportunity that we are giving you. I will just remind you that we are all here to learn. We're probably all wondering the same thing anyways. And this is a safe space, underline safe space, where all introverts can come out and shine. There are no stupid questions. And if it's a really stupid question, we'll just edit it out before we upload onto YouTube. No, I'm just kidding. No, I'm seriously kidding. There are no stupid questions. So the recording will be made available to you afterwards. So if this is always a question that gets asked, yes, we are recording. Yes, it will be available. And I'm going to pass the mic on to Christopher now. And the stage is yours.
Thank you, Veronica. Thank you very much. So if I could see you, I would be looking for you to raise your hands when I ask this question. How many of you have something in your life where you're stuck, you're confused, you're coping and feel trapped in some way, and there's something that you want to change? And I would hope that most of the hands go up, because they do when I'm in most audiences. And then I have to ask the question on the other side, of course, who has everything they want, gets out of bed every day with complete joy and freedom, and has nothing that they want to change? And if your hand goes up, what I have to say to you is, there's nothing I have to say to you in my segment today. So you might multitask or something, at least while I'm presenting, and then come back for Matthew and some of the really great applied stuff. So I will confess that even though I'm a speaker and a workshop leader and a writer and everything, I am an introvert. And what that means is, it doesn't mean I'm not social. It means that I recharge by being alone. But I'm certainly happy to communicate. So if you're an introvert out there, right, I'm part of your club. So my main message is to lead yourself first. And that's what I'm really going to be talking about today with everything that I have to show you. And yes, I'm going to introduce you to the responsibility process and to some of the aspects of your crazy mind. And I'm probably going to say a lot of things that are very weird and strange to you. My goal is to pique your interest into looking for more, because there's a lot of truth and honesty and transparency and openness and practicality behind the information that I have to bring you. As we get started, I want to say thank you to Veronica for our weeks of planning and meeting and figuring out what we're going to do here, and to Dimitar, who I also had the opportunity to meet with. Thank you very much. I appreciate you. And to everyone on this Zoom, thank you for taking time out of your busy day, where I'm sure that you've got a checklist as long as my arm of things to do, a to-do list. Thank you for taking time to expose yourself to some new ideas. That's a luxury. And that means that you're having a luxurious hour or two here, and I hope that you will enjoy it in that way. So the keys to leading yourself first are also the keys to responsibility. And these keys are intention, awareness, and confront. Intention, awareness, and confront. Each of these is a piece of your consciousness. Together, they make up a great deal of your consciousness, maybe all of it, I don't know, right? But each is a mental capability. It's like a mental muscle that you were born with, and you can develop it like any other muscle. And the interesting thing that I've sort of learned through my life of applying responsibility and trying to lead myself first is that society did not develop these capabilities in me, and they tend not to develop them in you. They develop our brain, they develop our intellect, and they develop our character. I say they, society develops our brain and our intellect, develops our character, but doesn't really develop our consciousness. And these things don't start being developed in us until we get an interest in personal growth and development programs, spiritual growth programs, and leadership development programs. Self-awareness is the leading component of leadership development programs across the world over the last 60 years, right? So if you go into leadership development programs, you're going to be learning more about yourself. Why? Well, how can you ever lead yourself or connect with others if you don't have some understanding of who you are, how you operate, and what you care about? So what I'm going to focus on, and I want you to think about today, is this is really titillating and interesting about how our mind works, but you can't change this. All you can do is be aware of it and realize whether you want to operate from blame or operate from justify or operate from shame or operate from obligation or operate, from responsibility. And then I'll get into how to practice intention. My first intention is to get to responsibility. And every place where I'm stuck or coping or upset or want to change. My second intention is to figure out more about who I am, my genius, my inspiration, what I want for myself, what I want to experience in this world. The first practice of awareness is becoming aware more and more of what it's like to be in my mind when I'm blaming, when I'm justifying, when I'm in shame, when I'm in obligation. And then it becomes a choice as to whether I want to stay there or not. And if I have an intention to get to responsibility, then intention plus awareness, right, moves me consciously to more freedom and more choice and more power. So we call responsibility the mental state of freedom, choice, and power. And confront is the real bugaboo here. Confront doesn't mean to get in somebody else's face and be aggressive towards them. That's one use of the word, but that's not how we use it. Confront means to face myself, right? To know when I'm at the edge of my comfort zone and go a little bit further. Confront means to look at my own fears, look at my own anxieties, and see what's making me cope and stay in coping instead of break through that and move towards growing. So that's the overall summary. And now I want to dig into some nuts and bolts for you. And I hope you don't mind if I don't use fancy PowerPoints and SlideShare. I like these hand drawings. So let's start here. Imagine that we have two minds, or maybe two parts of our mind, an upper mind and a lower mind. There are many, many, many people who use this two-mind model, and it's been around for decades in terms of talking about the human mind. The upper mind, I have to reach way over there for the card. The upper mind goes by the name of the resource mind or the creative mind or the growth mind, depending on what psychologist or sociologist or educator you're reading. The lower mind goes by the name of the ego mind, the defensive mind, or the resistant mind. So I hope that you recognize each of these, and I hope that you recognize that you have each of these. You know, what is the game? The game, especially in self-leadership and in being productive and in performing, is to, as much as possible, stay in or move yourself to the upper mind, the resource mind, the creative mind, the growth mind. Now, here's what I want to bring your attention to, and that is, what are the drivers in each of these minds? If we can understand this, we can become more aware of how and where we're operating. So let's start in the lower mind. The drivers in the lower mind are approval, being approved of by others, safety, right? Feeling safe in whatever's happening, and control. I've heard this called trying to control the next microsecond of reality. Not control everybody else and manipulate, but try and hold on to the reality as you understand it, as opposed to going, wonder why that's going on, right? The upper mind is driven, the drivers in the upper mind are experiencing your unique genius and your unique inspiration, and fully understanding what you want and being able to express that authentically. When you have the most joy and the most freedom and the most power in your life is when you are being you and following your unique inspiration and genius and your unique expression of self. The issue is that our society is really, really good at reinforcing approval, safety, and control in order to get you to conform, right? And our society is not generally nearly as good at reinforcing your unique genius and inspiration, getting you to be individual. So as we grow up, we get conditioned to really seek more and more of this. And as a rule, we don't get conditioned to seek more and more of this. And so what I'm going to show you here is how you actually start to reprogram or recondition yourself. The way to do that is by recognizing the programs and interrupting them. So switch gears just a little bit here. Here's a picture of your weird mind, right? So our mind is full of aberrated thoughts, beliefs, erroneous assumptions, unconscious programs that just kick in. So my life got a lot better when I realized that my mind is crazy and there's nothing wrong with me, that everybody's mind is crazy because of the programming and the conditioning in it and the erroneous stuff that we are told and we believe. So we end up creating a lot of autopilot rules or operations. And a way to understand that is to think about what Stephen Covey said. Stephen Covey said between stimulus and response is a space. Right? Between stimulus and response is a space. Between stimulus and response is a space. And he goes on to say, and in that space is choice. And in that choice is your freedom and your power. Right? So stimulus, response, choice. We always have a choice, even when we say, I have no choice. Right? However, what I know from a lot of developmental psychology is that at a very early age, we start creating rules about stimulus and our response. And when we create these rules, what happens is there's no space for choice. And it's instead of stimulus response, it's stimulus react, stimulus react, stimulus react. I hate squash. I'll never date an engineer again. Right? I'll never speak back to a supervisor. Right? So these things happen throughout our lives, right? And we don't actually recognize the stimulus. Oh, look at that. And think, what do I want about this? By the way, write that down. What do I want about this? What do I want about this mess? What do I want about this problem? What I want is the best question I've found to get myself to responsibility. And maybe I can come back to that in a little bit. But we don't do that. We don't create that space. And the practice that I'm going to introduce you to is all about creating that space and being willing to enter that space and examine it and think about what I want so that your response is genuine and authentic and driven from your unique genius and your unique inspiration, rather than driven from what you should do or what's expected of you or what others will approve of. All right, so I'm going to skip a couple of things here. So the responsibility process. Every time something goes wrong, there's a little bit of conflict generated in your mind between what you want and what you have. So it looks like this: two thoughts, what I want and what I have. And I sometimes illustrate it by saying what I want is just to sit down for 10 minutes with a nice cup of tea. And I just got done making the cup of tea and I'm leaving the kitchen and I'm heading to the place where I'm going to sit down and enjoy it. And I trip over something on the floor and I go flying and the tea goes flying and it's all over me and all over everything. At that minute, I have some anxiety. because what I want is to sit down and enjoy a nice cup of tea, and what I have is a big mess. So problems get created in the mind by our own ideas of conflicting ideas between what we want and what we have. And we can go into that deeper. So society teaches you the problems are out there. My responsibility studies teach me all problems are defined in here. And it's just two tiny microjoules of thoughts colliding. And that creates anxiety. And the anxiety triggers the responsibility process in our mind. And we enter the process at blame. So it's a relatively linear process if we choose to climb the ladder. But we can also stay in blame for a second or a minute or a day or a year or a lifetime around some problem. And it's just a mental state, and it has its own cause-effect logic. And the cause-effect logic is that the cause is out there, and the cause is an entity. It's a person or a group or a department or a function or a company, and it has a name. And so that's the cause, and I'm at effect. And the premise is that for my effect to change, for me to be happy, for my problem to go away, they must change. And of course, none of us are very good at changing others. So psychologists for eons have told us that this is a powerless stance. It's a victim stance. Our research says it's a mental state, and it persists or it goes away because of your choice. Right? So in between stimulus and response is choice. So throughout my life, I have learned to let go of blame the moment it enters me, because I know that I'm powerless there. If I let go of blame, then the next thought that I have is a story about circumstances or situation out of my control. That's justify. Justify is an especially pernicious mental state or coping mechanism. We're so good at it. Right? We're really, really good. I didn't have time. It's the weather. It's did you see the traffic out there this morning? I'm sorry I'm late. All right? It's the economy. I followed the process. On and on and on. We're really good at justifying. Justify is our story. The logic is the same as lay blame, except instead of blaming a person or an entity, you're putting the blame on a set of circumstances, on a situation. And of course, they're always outside of our control. So it's easy to justify, right? And you'd think smart, creative, bright people like you and me would get past blame and justify. Here's what our research shows. The smarter we are, the better stories we make up. Right? So it has this pattern has nothing to do with intelligence, education, motivation, ambition, none of that. It's in all of us. And we either become aware of it and use our capabilities of intention awareness and confront to let go of these lower mental states where we're coping and grow to responsibility, or we spend the rest of our life in these coping states. You probably know somebody stuck in blame or justify who's been there a long, long time. You can see that they'd be a lot happier if they'd let it go, but they can't see that, right? So the same is true for you and me wherever we're stuck. If we stop justifying, then the next thing that happens is we start feeling bad. And the reason is that we've eliminated all the external pointing. So what's left is to go, oh, I did this to myself. I'm the dummy. I'm the dolt. Gosh, I'm stupid. Will I never learn? Right? What's wrong with me? And so this has been reinforced our whole lives that there's something wrong with you. You probably started having people ask you at a very early age, what's wrong with you? Why did you do that? And then we learn if we'll critique and beat ourselves up first, then we'll feel better, and people will approve of us more. We'll feel safer if we criticize ourselves before others can criticize us. So if you're human, there's nothing wrong with you. Shame is simply experienced as guilt, is something that we all experience. And if you decide to stop beating yourself up for having a problem or making a mistake or being in a sour situation, then the next thing that happens is you feel trapped. So the mental state of obligation is the mental state of have to, don't want to, right? So I have to go to this stupid meeting. I have to do this horrible paperwork. I have to go to this kid thing after school instead of enjoying a cold, frosty beverage with my friends. I have to go to my in-laws for holiday. Have to. We even today say, I have to go to the grocery store. I have to go to the bathroom. I have to eat something. I have to. It's still anxiety driven, right? It's coming from a space of not being in charge, a space of lack. I call it the mental space, I call it the mental state of have to, don't want to. Have to, don't want to, right? Have to, don't want to. It's not until we refuse to cooperate with our mind that's telling us that we're trapped that we can get into the mental state of responsibility. And in the mental state of responsibility, it seems like we have the full access to the complex, adaptive, stochastic, probabilistic reasoning available in our minds, right? We're much more brilliant in the mental state of responsibility, where it's called owning the problem and owning that we got ourselves into this and we can get ourselves out of it. And it's truly the ability to respond, stimulus, space, response. And it's a beautiful experience when you have it. And you have had many experiences throughout your life. Every time you have coped with some situation, some obstacle, some mountain, some roadblock for a long time, and then you figured it out, you had the aha, you found the inspiration, you found the genius. When you did that was you naturally got to the place of responsibility in your mind. So for me, this is the growth process. This is the consciousness growth process. And you get to do it for the rest of your life, unless you don't want to, and then you get to cope and be stuck and complain for the rest of your life. So one of the things I'd like you to do is to think about going to responsibility.com and downloading a full color copy of the poster. And it has all the definitions of each of the mental states. And it has a summary of what I just explained on the back. And Kanban and I will follow up here with a link. And that poster is
It's posted in the chat.
Great. Don't go now. Open it up in a browser, but stay with us, right? And go download it.
The link isn't going anywhere, guys. We'll include it in the follow-up email. Just stay with us.
we have the poster in 29, I think, languages now, including Klingon. That's a legitimate language. And so to just kind of summarize, in blame and justify, we get no results. Think about those meetings you've been in at some employment where you met with others for weeks over some problem or conflict, and the conversation never got past finger pointing, and no results accrued, right? So in blame and justify, we get no results because we think something else has to change before we can make progress or be happy. Shame and obligation actually produces more anxiety, and it produces action, puts people into action, right? When I say shame on you to somebody, they go, oh, I better do something, right? So we produce unsatisfying results in shame and obligation. And only in responsibility do we produce results that matter. So I'm going to turn it over to Matthew, but on the way to doing that, I'm going to share with you a LinkedIn article that I wrote some time ago about the relationship between lean, agile thinking and responsibility. And you'll also get a link to this article, and you'll recognize the banner looks like this. Thanks. Open it up. Don't go there now. It's in your chat.
Also posted in the chat. Yep.
So here I think the most important relationships between responsibility and agility. For me, I think the idea of responding to change. Agility is all about responding to change. And we're not very good at that until we own the fact that we live in an environment where change is constant, and being able to experience the stimulus, step into the space, and choose a response is an amazing skill. And in fact, while the world of Agile is my single largest marketplace, I do not market myself as an agilist. I believe that responsibility is much more fundamental, and I'm much more interested in understanding and teaching responsibility everywhere that it matters, as opposed to waving the flag of Agile. And I love Agile. I'm an organizational scientist of 35 years now, and Agile is the most profound, has the most profound impact of any fad. Fad's maybe the wrong word, isn't it? Of any movement. But even Agile to me is an outgrowth of the quality movement. And the quality movement is even an outgrowth of the humanistic movement that started before it. Many people believe that responsibility is the essence of agility, and I'm not going to ask you to buy that. I'm just going to put it out there as something a lot of people like. Self-organizing. I try and stay as far away from management and using authority systems in my company. I attract people who love our work and who want to use their unique genius and inspiration to meld with this. We totally self-organize. It's one of the things I love about Kanban, and Kanban done well. Responsibility is a huge, huge aid to self-organizing. It's fundamental. And once you understand responsibility, you understand the humanity, the increase in humanity. For instance, I know that society teaches us that if we see somebody else who's in denial or blaming or justify, society gives us permission to laugh and point fingers and call them stupid or arrogant or ignorant. I now know there's nothing wrong with them. I know they just have a problem, an internal conflict that they don't know how to take ownership of, and they're stuck coping. So what you'll find about the responsibility community is it's an extremely humane, very compassionate, very understanding community, especially all of our teachers and mentors and coaches. We've all been through everything that we see in anybody else. How could we dare judge them in any way? So those are the main things. I'm going to leave you with this, right? One of my themes today has been you either cope or grow. So below the line, we're coping, above the line, we grow. And I'm sure there's a lot of people interested in lean on this call. All of these mental states below the line, we could look at as wasted thought and wasted action, right? And of course, valuable thought and valuable action is above the line. And leave you with this: for things to change, first I must change, right? So when I get myself to the mental state of responsibility, then the things that I'm looking at change, and I'm much more powerful. So Matthew, I hope that was a good setup for stories that you have to share about your work in Agile and coaching.
That was amazing. Huh? I mean, I don't know if I have any ink left in my Sharpie. I was taking copious Post-it notes because so much goodness that you just shared with us. So thank you. And first off, I just want to tell everybody, I don't sit here before you as some kind of exemplar or anything like this. This is very humbling when you start thinking about what this is, and ultimately, as Christopher said, it's free. But I had an experience even this morning walking in. So I'm at our headquarters office in New York City today, and I came into the building, and I had my badge. And yesterday I'd come in, and something happened with my badge. My picture wasn't showing up, and so the security guard said, "Oh, at some point you need to go and get that fixed." And so I said, "Okay, great." And sure enough, I come in this morning, and the little sensor goes off. And what do you think my first response was in terms of taking responsibility? My first reaction was to say, "I didn't have time to do it yesterday. Sorry." And of course, that's wrong. I'm falling back into these conditioned self-protective behaviors, and I could have taken responsibility. I said I didn't do it yesterday because I either inadvertently or intentionally prioritize other things. So just to know, I stand before you or sit before you, not as someone you need to think is above you in any way. I'm just like you, just like Christopher said. So anyway, yes, the defensive response. It happens all the time. So anyway, but I love this because it does really directly impact what happens when you think about leadership in organizations, leadership in our teams. And you know, a lot of excuse making happens, I think, when we think about we're blocked or some things are limiting us, right? Whether it's leadership, other people, you know, if you're familiar with reinventing organizations, they talk about an organization's limited by the consciousness of its leader, right? And so it can kind of make us feel like we don't have any real responsibility, or you know, we're the victims. You know, we just have a bad situation. But I find that there's a lot of room for us to take responsibility in our sphere. And of course, as Christopher says, the first sphere that we have control over is our own lives. And so much of what I heard in what you're saying, Christopher, is actually, I was introduced to the core protocols a long time ago, earlier in my career. And I think there's a lot of resonance there, you know, in terms of intention. You know, what's checking our intention, our alignment, what is it we want? But also, like you said, interrupting that habit loop, hacking that habit loop, so that we can be more effective leaders. When we talk about leadership at every level, you know, it starts with exhibiting leadership behaviors in our own lives, being responsible for what we do. And so, yeah, thanks for that. It's good stuff. It's kind of like a forgotten relic, I think, but I think there's a lot of good stuff in the old core protocols, especially nowadays when we're working remotely and in hybrid environments. So I don't want to take too much time. I think there's a lot of great mentoring opportunities here for everybody. But just to say, for me, looking at leadership, looking at how teams work, really thinking about taking responsibility. You know, Christopher mentioned self-organizing teams. This is really the key. You know, I've seen different organizational cultures, a lot of which are this leader-follower culture, right? I'm not going to act. I'm not going to take responsibility because other people are telling me what to do. I'm going to wait on other people's commands. And then as a result, I don't have to take responsibility for what I do. And so much of what I've done and try to do is move cultures from that leader-follower culture to a leader-leader culture. And it does start with taking responsibility from a leadership standpoint. So I'm eager to hear what you all have here and how we can think through these things together. But just appreciate you, Christopher, for sharing this with us. It's great stuff. And I'll open it up to the group. But Veronica, thanks for inviting me, and thanks for allowing me to sit here. I feel like I'm listening and learning in the group.
You're being too humble. You're being much too humble. All right, so we are going to open up to the audience, where, as I said, there's somewhere down here, you should have a raise hand button. If you have raised your hand, I will likely call you out by name, and you can ask your question out loud, and we can start with our mini mentoring sessions. Please don't be shy, safe space. I was just joking about the stupid questions. Please don't shy away from this incredible opportunity. Without further ado, I'm just going to go by order of appearance since I have no idea what the questions are. But the first person, and I'm so sorry if I'm butchering this name, Joris Swinen. I'm going to give you permission to unmute yourself, and you can go ahead.
Hello, is this on?
Yes.
Hello. Hi, Christopher. I think we met a few years ago in Ghent after training. Nice to see you again.
Good to see you, Joris.
I have a question concerning the difference between self-awareness in leadership, when you are aware of laying blame, and if you are confronted in a meeting or retrospective or what have you, and you are confronted where other people are blaming. How do you give some takes on it, that it's not becoming moralizing, that people say like, oh, but do you know there is a responsibility process where you can get from a lower step to a higher step? So would you like to share a take on that?
Sure. Does this happen to you often, Joris?
Well, I keep it to myself, so I am not trying to moralize, but if I would say like, let's not blame, that's not going to make it neither. So that's why I'm still looking for some guidance.
Yeah. Well, ultimately, we define responsibility as owning one's ability to create, choose, and attract. So right here on the poster, right below where it says responsibility, it defines it as owning your ability and power to create, choose, and attract. So if I'm sitting in a meeting and somebody blames me for something, if I'm in the kitchen of my home and somebody blames me for something, right? It doesn't matter where I am, if somebody blames me for something. The ultimate awareness is, how did I create, choose, or attract this? A bit of curiosity there. Wow, if this is happening in my world, this is happening around me, then, and if I'm practicing responsibility, then I must have had something to do with creating it, choosing, or attracting it. In other words, I must have wanted it at some level. So if I do that, so what's happening there is it puts me in a place of confronting the truth, confronting myself, right? Provides me with some awareness. And then I get to ask myself, what do I want about this? I'm looking through my cards here. I get to ask myself, what do I want? All right. And usually what I want is to move the conversation to a more productive place. But there's lots of different ways that people come at this. One would be, oh, I see what you did there, right? So really kind of inviting them to confront that they're blaming without moralizing. Another would be to silently just forgive them, right? The famous biblical statement, they know not what they do, right? They're unaware of the responsibility process and they're coping. I certainly would not moralize with somebody, say, don't you know about the responsibility process? And aren't you an expert at it yet? So I hope that gives you a little bit of insight, Joris.
Yeah, thank you. On the other side, it's not only if it's directed to yourself, but if people are blaming other people and you try to tweak it, as you mentioned, to more sphere of influence settings, but still, I suppose you don't want to come up with theory of, well, let's get one step further in that process to be aware that it's not just helping to blame.
Yeah, well, so another thing I do when someone's blaming me is I just totally let it go, right? Their blame is a projection. It says more about them than it says about me. If I'm affronted by it, if I'm annoyed by it, then I'm actually letting them get under my skin, and I'm taking their projection as my definition of me. So, the idea of water running off a duck's back. And also, all the greatest teachers that I've read, the greatest sages of all time, they often would completely ignore ignorant statements made in their vicinity.
Yeah.
But if somebody's blaming somebody else in my meeting, I would hope that we've at least had a conversation about responsibility process. I would hope that I'm posting pictures of the responsibility process, and I would hope that I've got agreement with my team to talk about responsibility. And so in that case, I might just say, let's just stop that and pause for a minute and think about what we want about this issue.
Okay.
If that person really is the problem, then how do we go to them and ask them to help us solve it?
Yeah. I think too, I've observed that kind of thing happening in groups, and I think I'm going to try to emulate Christopher here. I don't know if this is going to work, but relationship to psychological safety, right? So the importance of having safety and understanding the environments that other people are acting in, right? And so what is it that's causing people to blame, right? So we want to assess our own intentions, but also having some empathy and understanding what, and Christopher said, curiosity about what's going on. A lot of it, I think, in my experience, has to do with lack of psychological safety, and people acting out in ways like we see blaming. And so taking that indirect approach to say, well, I'm not going to work on the person so much every time, which can come off as moralizing, but directing our efforts at the environment and shaping the environment, creating greater safety. One of the things that has been really, I think, important for me as a coach and helping groups and leaders is really understanding the Kanban culture mantra, which this works again. So this idea that outcomes follow practices, which follow culture, which follows values. And so a lot of times we intervene at this practices level, right? Just do some practices. There are a lot of great practices, but really we forget that people are operating in a particular culture, and whether it's really emphasizing self-protective behaviors like we're talking about, or just a lack of psychological safety, people are acting in a particular culture that's based on someone's or some group's values. And so getting closer at the root of that, I think, is helpful before we think about practices, or at least understanding where practices are being. It's like almost like soil that we're planting seeds in. If you have bad soil, the seeds, however good, might not take root.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. I do see that we have one question in the chat as well. We will get to it. I'm just going in order of hand raises. So thank you, Joris. I will lower your hand for you. Dimitar is next with a question. Of course, he will have a question on this, his favorite subject after Kanban. Maybe it's the same, I'm not sure.
Thank you, gentlemen. It's been amazing. Thank you so much. My question is to both of you, and it is whether you have seen people who have successfully climbed the corporate ladder despite being in blame or justify or shame. That's it.
Matthew, you want to start?
So people who don't exhibit responsibility, are they able to succeed?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
If that's the definition of success, climbing the corporate ladder.
Right. Yeah. That's a great point. Yeah, I think it happens everywhere. I think that's, like I said, like Christopher was saying, it's kind of the bias of our culture, the bias of how we work and how things get rewarded. It often takes a lot of courage to be able to take responsibility, and sometimes that exposes you as having, if you admit your failure, how does your culture take that? So I do think it has it is certainly not even uncommon, but I would say common for people to ascend in different organizational cultures without having to take responsibility. Christopher, I don't know what you've seen.
Yeah, sure. So you can be very successful in toxic cultures in terms of climbing the ladder. And it's helpful to understand that these mental states, not only do we adopt them and operate from them ourselves, but we sell them to those around us, right? So we can appear to be very successful, or let me use the word powerful, by constantly blaming and justifying. We've seen some world leaders recently on the media doing that, and they very successfully divide camps, right, and attract followers. So I think you asked, have I seen? Yes. And I don't work for them. They don't want my help. They don't want what I have to offer.
Thank you.
Yeah. Also,
Unfortunately, I've seen them as well.
yeah.
I hope that I was the exception, but I guess I'm not.
No, you're not the exception at all. So, people often ask me, Christopher, when are you going to go to, I realize it's an international audience here, but, when are you going to go to Washington, D.C. And smarten those people up? And my answer is never. They don't want me because they operate from a completely different operating system. Yeah.
Again, I would say
sorry.
that can be depressing. Sorry, Veronica. That reality can be depressing, right? We see it all around us. We see it in world leaders, governments, etc. But I think one of the great things you can do if you're a leader in any way is to provide that gift to people. At the end of the day and end of your life, let's face it, we're not going to change all the organizations we're in, but that when you can make an impact on other people and model the courage to take responsibility, I think that's a huge gift, wherever you are, whatever your organization. So if it's just a little team, if you're a leader, a CEO, I think we could be daunted by and depressed by the reality. But I think, again, taking responsibility for what we can do in our spheres is the key to the freedom there.
Nice, Matthew.
Okay, I'm moving next to Robert, who has his hand up as well. Robert, you can unmute yourself.
I am unmuted.
Yes, you
thanks
are.
very much. Thanks very much, guys, for these wonderful thoughts you have. Up until now, as far as I can tell, everything you've been talking about concerns processes and activities by individuals. But what we attempt to do, especially in lean, agile environments, is to try to get teams to take responsibility. So my question for you is, how do you see if there's a difference between the process of getting to responsibility for an individual as opposed to the process for a team getting to responsibility?
I really like the question. I want to hear Christopher's answer. I have a couple mediocre thoughts, but I want to hear. It's a great question. Yeah.
So I've been at this 30 some years. It was about 10 or 12 years ago. No, more than that, about 15 years ago, I turned my attention away from teamwork and collaboration as my whole first career to leadership and personal responsibility. You might go find a book I wrote called Teamwork is an Individual Skill. Look at the subtitle, Getting Your Work Done When Sharing Responsibility. And I did a multi-year phenomenological research program where I challenged myself to figure out how to teach software project leaders or anybody else how to build any team, anytime. And I found a set of 5 conversations that you can use that have responsibility, shared responsibility emerge in a team. So the conversations are these, and there's a step 0. The step 0 says, first take 100% responsibility for being on a great team. Right? And that means knowing the steps to take to turn a group into a team or turn a committee into a team. Step 1 is to get shared clarity around what the team is to do, right? I call that state the task as the reason for the team. You'd be surprised how many quote teams you're on where people don't have shared clarity about what they're to do. And that's the #1 predictor of group cohesion today, is task interdependence. That if I see Matthew working hard towards our goal, it makes me want to match his effort and work hard towards that, because when Matthew's winning, I'm winning. The second step is to surface motivation, find out what's in it for each other beyond a paycheck. And, if there's nothing in it for some people on the team beyond a paycheck, I'd want to know sooner than later. So confront the issues of uneven contribution, freeloading. We know that performance will fall to the level of the least motivated worker. So that's the second thing that I would address in conversation with team members. And then build trust through making and keeping agreements and ways of working, which is very popular in Agile to understand this. And those are the big three. And then there's a couple of more. So yeah, I've looked into that a little bit.
It's fun when you can just say, well, there's a book for that, and I wrote it. Yeah, well, the question made me think too about the mutual reinforcing of both taking individual responsibility, and then there's a kind of a group, either kind of, I've seen group victim, mentality, right? So we're all in this together, but it's kind of is the victim status, group lack of responsibility, and so I like the idea of both of these things working bidirectionally. But Christopher mentioned, what are we doing here? A lot of people these days talk about 16 conditions. Compelling purpose, one of the three core elements of that. So, and again, you can foster a team mentality that's like us against the world. There's responsibility in that. It's you're at least taking responsibility. So, yeah, I like the question quite a bit.
Okay, let's move on to the next one. Andrea, if you would like to unmute yourself.
Hi, firstly, I want to really thank you. I've always loved that topic and learned a lot about it. And it just felt like you summarized my 10 years of insights within like an hour. And I wish I would have come across you before. So thank you for that, definitely. And I just want to ask maybe a bit of a tricky question. You mentioned earlier that conditioning and expectations are preventing us from making choices, as you said, that are coming from our own genius or our true self. And do you have any tips on how to, let's say, free oneself from that conditioning? Because once confronting, like often the feeling of getting into conflict with others or feeling wrong about it comes up. So is there any tip that you can give us how to overcome that?
Sure.
Yeah, the confronting part is then where this comes up, isn't it?
Develop your consciousness through the practice of intention, awareness, and confront. So these things, to me, these things are self-referential. They call on each other. When I work on one, it calls up another. And I have exposed myself to lots and lots and lots of personal growth and spiritual growth and leadership growth ideas. For me, they all fit under the same category of intention, awareness, and confront. And for me, using this as a signal device in my mind to know whether or not I'm operating from a coping state or whether I'm actually operating from freedom, choice, and power, for me is the most foundational tool I've found for myself. And so it's, this and this is most important to me, but it leads me to trying to understand lots of other things. And I, read widely. Currently, I've had about a 5-year study of metaphysics going on. Metaphysics means beyond the physical. The idea that thoughts are things and that our language produces our results. So if I keep going around saying I'm such a klutz, I'll be a klutz, right? And my responsibility training would teach me to catch that program and interrupt it and say, I don't think I'll be so klutzy anymore. I don't know, is that very helpful, Andrea, or maybe Matthew, you can add?
Yeah, well, for me, actually just yesterday, I was working with a global leadership team who they had not ever met in person. So they're trying to just work as a team better. And we did a modified version of the marketplace of skills. I don't know if anyone on the call today is familiar with that, but it's a a great technique for helping people learn about each other in the team, but also we added a bit of self-disclosure to it. So one of the questions we added was what you can do to make me more awesome. And it's really an opportunity for people to say, here are my weaknesses, and here's the things that I know, going back to the awareness about where we have tendencies to either fall into the rut of blame or justification. And so it's really great because again, assuming there's enough safety there, and this group had enough safety to be able to be open about that. But it's really great because when you see, oh right, for example, for me, I have a tendency to really get I trigger on when someone's talking about something it's not right, or there's there's some lack of my perceived truthfulness about what's going on, and I feel a really strong desire to correct what's going on, right? And so if I disclose that to my teammates and I say, listen, can you look out for me when we're in a meeting together, or whatever, even if it's just one person. Sometimes there are a few relationships I have were really close, and where I even would do like a book ending. So the technique of book ending is where you're going to have an important meeting, for example, or something that's fraught with maybe emotional intensity, and you meet ahead of time, just before the meeting, and then you know that you've agreed to meet afterward. So it's almost like this built-in accountability, and so you're proactively taking responsibility for your own. Again, like Christopher, we all suffer from this. We all have a proclivity to this. But when you invite someone else into that, and you actually help them feel a sense of purpose and a sense of involvement, it can be really powerful, whether it's at the team level, like we did with this group yesterday at the Marketplace of Skills. So everybody knows, right, this person tends to react really viscerally, and you can read it on her face. And so first, I know that she's not really that upset, or I just know that that's how she deals with things, but also I can help her and etc. And likewise, my particular problem. But helping even to go in a deeper level, like what's driving that? Why do I feel a need to correct people when they're wrong? What's wrong with me? But anyway, a couple things: bookending and Marketplace of Skills with that question. What you can do to make me more awesome?
Yeah. Can I come back with a little bit more for Andrea?
Yay.
So to what Matthew just said, one of the things I started doing years ago was give up right and wrong. Right? Because right and wrong tends to lead to shame and obligation, and it keeps me from being in that space of responding to stimulus. And the logic behind that is that right and wrong is a human-made shortcut for controlling ourselves and disciplining ourselves and for conforming to what's expected. So there's a huge field beyond right and wrong, as the poet Rumi said. I'll meet you there. And the other thing I did was I start giving up should and shouldn't. So good, bad, right, wrong, should and shouldn't are really a very tiny part of my thinking process today. And I mentioned earlier the what do I want about this question. So what I've learned is that right, wrong, good, bad, should, shouldn't map to these coping states. And our society has taught us to, when we're in a situation, ask, what should I do? What's the right answer? And that just leads back to, more coping. And so the question that I found that leads us to actually leading ourselves and gets to responsibility is the question, what do I want? And my last comment about this, Andrea, is one of the great tools that we have found very, very helpful is the psychological ability to let go. It comes under lots of language, letting go, releasing, surrendering, clearing. But the idea is that if I catch myself in blame, I get to choose whether to stay there or let it go. Right? And what it looks like is we've all experienced running into the grocery store, big grocery store. We need 2 items. We find those 2 items. We go to the front to check out. and all the checkout lanes are full and there's 6 or 7 people in line. And we get angry and blood rushes up to our skin and we think, I don't have time for this, right? And then you realize you can move into that space between stimulus and response, and you realize you can stand there in line being really upset and mad, or you can let it go, right? So it's an amazing power that we have to let things go. And if you're interested in digging deeper, there's a book by David Hawkins called Letting Go, The Pathway to Surrender. And so that's one of our biggest tools, is letting go.
Thank you so much. This was really amazing. And the only other question I would have is, when are you starting to read your own books? So, because I love audiobooks, and I just checked and yours is not on there yet. So
when am I what?
So, I just checked Audible for an audiobook because I'm an audiobook addict, and it would be great to read one book.
I want to sit down sometime and read my own book with commentary and turn it into an audiobook, and I just have not done it yet.
I'd buy it right away. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The director's cut. I like it.
Yeah.
Okay. We do have a few more hands up, so I'm gonna go straight to the next person. We have Deborah with her hand up. Deborah, you can unmute yourself.
Hi, nice to meet you both. Thank you so much for this amazing conversation. I'm brand new to this whole philosophy and strategy. And so I'm sitting here, I think you've answered some of my questions, but I'm definitely sitting here looking at the responsibility process and thinking, am I in blame here? Or what am I doing? Okay, so my issue is that I'm working with a team where there's public shaming going on and some generational toxic male energy. And I'm stepping into a leadership role where I'll be able to make some suggestions to hopefully see a culture shift. And so I just am wondering if you have any recommendations for me on how to address these two very, very sticky issues. So public shaming and toxic male energy. So am I in the blaming phase? I mean, this is a real problem, and I don't appreciate how some people are treating our executive director in meetings, and I want to see a shift there.
I'd like to see what Matthew says.
Yeah. First off, I'm really sorry to hear that. That's really bad. I mean, it sounds like it's uncomfortable for people working there, but also for you. I don't think you, if I understand you asking, I don't think you're blaming by wondering what to do. It doesn't sound like that's the case. I think it sounds like you're trying to help. I'm interested in the shaming, the public shaming, what that looks like, how that manifests itself.
Yeah, I mean, in front of a room, in front of colleagues, a board member is making statements that I think are humiliating to the executive director and the way he communicates. And he's I think he's 69. So he comes from a different kind of generation where that was acceptable. Yeah. And that's no longer acceptable. And I'm so grateful to Brene Brown for helping me find my own words where I can say it out loud. When people do that to me, I'm I don't respond well to public shaming. So if you would like to have a one-on-one conversation, so I would like to infuse that into our culture.
Right. Yeah, I've seen that, you kind of mentioned the generational thing, just expectations for how people are treated at work. I refer to that sometimes as brackish waters, where you've got you've got fresh water and you've got, as Christopher's comment says, sometimes it aligns generationally, sometimes it's anyway, we can take responsibility for our actions at any age. But the brackish waters is where you've got two cultures, two different types of water coming together, and there's turbulence, there's difficulty there. I'm interested to know, if it sounds like you're empathizing with the person who's being abused or shamed.
Yes.
Have you had a chance to have the conversation with that person?
I have not yet. We just all got together for the first time live in 2 years, and so I really got to see it at play.
Yeah. I think that's maybe from a coaching standpoint where I would move and find out. Sometimes we have our own responsibility to speak into the situation. Sometimes we deprive someone of the opportunity to take responsibility for his or her situation, the person in question here. And that's the coaching opportunity to help that person. So I don't have any easy answers for you. Maybe Christopher has some insights for us.
So I get to address questions like these with Agile coaches a lot. And let me confront the truth, right?
Yes.
The place to handle this is in contracting. The place to handle these issues where we get into issues where people don't want to listen to us, we don't have any authority, we can't say what's true, we can't call people out. The place to start dealing with that is in contracting. So my first thought when I heard you start talking about this is get out, get out, get out. Right? Find some place where people want what you have to bring. Then my second answer is build up your own authority, right? And be willing to be fired for telling people, stop that, right? That's not okay here.
Okay.
And the third thing I would have to tell you is back to contracting is require every group that you work with to go through some orientation process where you bring in, what allows you to go quickly and have a set of agreements. For me, I don't work with any group that doesn't want to have a really good understanding of the responsibility practice and give me freedom to hold the space for 100% responsibility as I'm working with them. And if they don't want that, then if they don't want that, then I don't have anything for them.
Okay, that's very helpful. Yeah, I'm always up for a challenge, part of my nature. But I like this team working agreement idea. I think that's a great place to start. You guys have given me two really great recommendations. One is I need to have a conversation with the person that's been on the recipient end and see how he responds to it. He's also comes from an older generation, so he may be more comfortable with this, but I certainly am not. And again, I just have found my words just recently. So I think that those are two really wonderful recommendations. And then what about the idea of bringing in a consultant to do a training?
Perhaps. Throughout my career, a lot of internal people try and solve a problem with one or two people with a training for everybody. Mm-hmm. And I like to dig in deeper and find out what problem they're trying to solve and how they think a training is going to solve it. I'm not really big on this idea of generational stereotyping, but I don't think you're going to solve a generational, I don't think you're going to solve a person's approach to how they feel safe by belittling others with a training for their group.
Right. Well,
be
my apologies if that came across not how I wanted to. I was really just trying to frame, like, there's definitely been a huge shift as of late. We all know that, in the past, things used to be very different for different types of people in the room. So
I've seen Gen X people in the boardroom belittle others.
Yeah. It's wrong, altogether wrong.
One final thought for you.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes.
final thought is maybe this is a longer play, but to develop a relationship with that leader that you're saying is behaving badly, and it could take some time, right, to develop trust. But again, taking some curiosity posture with that person to understand, people a lot of times behave because that's what's got them to their place in their career, right? And so understanding what's going on for that person. Sometimes in my experience, I've actually worked with some leaders after getting to know them, again, they're responsible for their actions. They're doing what works for them in their culture. And so, so I see James comment, it's the culture. So it sounds like you're new to the area. So understand the culture, again, going back to the common culture mantra, what kind of culture are they working in? What are the values even that they're maybe not even espoused? There's values that you see on the posters in the hallway of the organization, but then you see the values that are encoded in things like your bonus program or who gets promoted, right? And what gets tolerated. So that's the difference between theory in practice and theory espoused. So if you have time, if you don't take Christopher's advice and run the other way or whatever, and you're able to get to know that person, get to know the culture, that might give you some clues too.
Okay. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. And I'll just, what James said in the chat is, often, you got to ask yourself, and maybe Matthew just alluded to this, is this individual speaking or is this the culture speaking? And if it's tolerated by the culture, then it's probably the culture speaking.
Right. Okay. Muchas gracias.
I will pass the mic to Christian.
Oh, I think it must be an error. I have nothing. I'm a coach myself, and I work a lot with management, and I'm 66 now, and most of my clients are about between 30 and 40 years old, and I think there is an issue between the generations, of course, but I think it's much more an issue regarding the self-perception of the people. And I think I can totally agree what you both said regarding this issue. Some people, they act, older managers like that they belittle a little bit younger people, but that is mostly a sign of fear, of bad self-perception. And I never would that generalize. I always would say that it's a very personal issue. And of course, if they would like to learn, a coaching can or could help them. But I agree totally, never a training. That's not the solution, because it's a very personal approach and you must deal with that. And everybody has to decide whether he wants to change his behavior or not. And with the younger people, you will not be successful anymore. And then you have to decide for yourself. If you're older, to step back, it's okay, because perhaps it's then the next step in your life where you can say, no, I will not be a leader anymore. Or you have to learn, and then you can learn for yourself in your own life, because this makes you younger yourself, because you can change your mind setting, and then you will see the world with another approach, and accept yourself very, very much. That's my opinion to that.
So that was more of a commentary from Christian rather than a question,
Excuse me,
is my understanding.
Thank you. It was by accident. No, it was by accident. No, it's my opinion. Yes, you are right. Sorry.
It was a happy accident.
No, it's we're happy to hear from you, of course. Andy has had his hand up for a while.
First, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Great to see you again, Christopher.
Hello.
Like Matthew, I have a deep-seated need to be right. For a long time in my career, I was a fixer. I found it flattering. And I have always justified my behavior by saying, it's not about me, I'm just helping them to be right. And it took me a long time to recognize it's all about me. So Christopher, if you could just talk a little bit about the potential perils of using your work to diagnose some other person, to point at them and start telling them, oh, you're just in justify, or you're in shame, and then trying to then fix them.
Stuff.
Is Christopher frozen?
Yeah.
Christopher might be frozen, which is Matt's cue to take over.
Yeah, he's totally deep in thought. Yeah, you're asking about whether, like, does it work to point out the log and the speck in someone else's eye, essentially? Well, neglecting the log in your own. Yeah, yeah. I think going back to safety, I think it's and kind of Christopher's philosophy of the idea of, he didn't say these words, but the invitation over inflicting someone. You know, like, if people don't want this, it's going to be, you're always going to be having a problem either at neutral, making it, you know, having no effect. At worst, you know, really making it worse for people in your relationship. So it's, for me, finding out whether people are even interested in that, but making it as safe as possible. Talking about, again, about psychological safety, making it as safe as possible for people to do the right thing and to change and be self-aware. As someone mentioned earlier, it usually doesn't happen in the context of a group training, right? I mean, individual relationships, trust relationships. I worked with a leader once who we did not get on very well at all, and so we had to start more fundamentally about just talking about things that we had in common, things that he was an expert in, to be able to say, to be able to have that long view of saying, right, how do we think about these things in our team, in our group, etc. But you pointing out the speck in someone else's eye is usually not going to be the winning recipe. I don't know. Welcome back, Christopher. I was just trying to fill in while you. So
my Zoom crashed. So yes, I don't know how much you heard of what I said. It sounds like I didn't get very far.
0. Yeah.
No.
We didn't hear any of it.
Okay, cool. So my immediate answer to you was in response to the very last thing that you said. And my answer was, the responsibility process only works when self-applied. Right? So it's only when someone practices intention awareness and confront for themselves does this process work. For me to say, I know what's wrong with you, you're in shame, right, will not do a thing for somebody else, except for bring up more resistance. And I often say to groups that I've spoken to, for, you know, before they go on break, you know, if you were thinking of calling that dear person that you love and saying, honey, I now know what's wrong with you, you've got to justify hang up, right? Don't do it, right? Instead, you get to ask yourself, right, how did I create, choose, and attract the opportunity to work with this lovely person, that there's nothing wrong with them? Because people are always doing the best they know how in that moment, given the situation and their level of consciousness. Therefore, there can't be anything wrong with them. And I get to ask myself, what do I want about this? You know, do I want to ask them if they have 10 minutes to get a coffee and let me scratch out the responsibility process on a napkin and tell them how I apply it to myself, and maybe they could use it? Do I want to, you know, how can I help you? What's going on, etc. The confession you made about always being right, the part of that program is that you have to find things to be wrong so that you have things to do. And that's the issue there, is that you're always going to find things that are wrong, that you have to correct. Recently, working with my mentor, the father of the responsibility process, his name is Bill McCarley, and he's part of my team. And he's the person who introduced me to this work 30 years ago. Working with him and some of my advanced students, 2 of my advanced students who've been at this for 6, 8, 10, 12 years, they realized, they became aware of the fact that they like to fix problems. They have engineering backgrounds. They got into consulting, coaching, agile stuff, and they really love fixing problems. And that means they need problems to fix in order to feel good about themselves. Right? And so they're working on letting go of the need to fix problems, because needing to fix problems attracts problems. So needing to be right attracts wrong.
Extremely insightful.
And you can simply, we have a catch sooner game that we teach, which you can change any habit of mind or behavior with this catch sooner game. And the steps are to catch yourself engaging in the thought pattern or the behavior that you want to change. And when you catch yourself, stop and forgive yourself, right, for being in that pattern again, right? And then vow to catch yourself earlier next time. So if I want to switch from eating donuts to eating celery, right, I see myself at a training classroom and there's that beautiful spread and there's the donut, and I pick it up and I have a bite, and I become aware during that bite, right, that I'm trying to not eat donuts. So most personal change programs teach you to punish yourself, right, which puts you in shame. We say stop, right, put the donut in the trash, maybe pick up the celery, and forgive yourself, have some compassion for yourself for realizing that these programs run deep and they don't change just because we consciously say that we want to change. And then vow to catch yourself earlier next time. And next time, maybe you'll catch yourself reaching for the donut, or you'll spy the donut from across the room. Right? Same can be true with needing to be right.
Thank you.
You just catch the program and disrupt it. Yeah.
Thank you both. And thank you to our audience for these wonderful questions. I apologize for having to be the bad guy, but we have reached the end of our time together. We will be sharing the poster resource and perhaps the LinkedIn article, but again, we have had a very successful LinkedIn train. So make sure you follow our speakers, Matthew Phillip, Christopher Avery, follow them on LinkedIn. There's plenty of resources. Just because we're ending this meeting today does not mean that you cannot reach out to them afterwards for more guidance. And thank you all for being here. Thank you, Matt, Christopher. Thank you so much. This has been truly a privilege to be part of and to organize. And I guess one last request would be for our audience, please fill out the survey at the end of this meeting. It'll pop out on your screen immediately as you leave. It really helps us create events like this and make them better, and share topics for future meetings if you have, for future KanConf mini conferences, I should say. It helps us tremendously. And as tradition calls, I'm going to have to ask for a selfie at the end of our meeting. So if our wonderful panelists can give me a smile or a funky frown or whatever you feel like. Perfect. Awesome. I love it. We're all done. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day, week, and take responsibility, fellas. You have the recipe.
Thank you, Veronica, for moderating Blagodaria. Thank you, Christopher. Thank you, everyone.
Oh, that was awesome. Well said. He just said thank you in Bulgarian for the rest of our folks. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.